Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge in negotiation, ethical influencing, and high impact conversations for business leaders who want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and build greater connection, all while increasing profitability. This is the short form espresso shot of insight podcast interview to boost business performance using our 5 questions in around about 15 to 20 minutes format. My guest today is James Parnell. James is an agile coach who helps entrepreneurs and their teams get great work done quickly. He works with entrepreneurs and business leaders who need a highly innovative team and better systems to sustain performance. If you're worried about time, money, and energy, ask yourself, are you spending too much time in the business rather than on it? As James says, if you are driving, you cannot tune the engine. Great point, James. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alice, for having me. Nice to be here.
Great to have you on. And look, it's a very interesting point about, I love the way you put that. If you're driving, you can't tune the engine. We're going to dive into that in a few minutes, but let's just get a bit of scope first. Let's just set the scene. So who is your ideal client and what's the biggest challenge that they face?
So my ideal client is someone who's in a position of influence. So I love to work with people who are, either in innovation or entrepreneurship, are doing something good for the world, whether that's through government or climate tech or something like that. I'm really keen. I figured this year I really wanted to focus on that niche, I guess, because when you think about you get to a certain age and you want to have the biggest influence or the biggest legacy you can. I thought a lot about my skills and what I can bring to the table and who I want to work with. And if I can help those people and by association their teams, that is the biggest ripple effect that I can have. So it's change makers, as I call them, but action takers as well, like people who are keen to translate ideas into action.
Very good. So arms dealers and big villains need not apply. But what
Yes,
are some of
exactly.
those challenges that they're facing? Just if anybody's listening out there, what are some of the things that you tend to be very effective at helping people? What are some of the symptoms you might say that they're suffering from before they meet you?
Yeah, well, I guess when you look at entrepreneurs and innovators, they're humans as well. And what they tend to be good at often is big ideas. And that environment can be chaotic depending on what stage the business is at. So, and chaos is a great thing for new ideas, brainstorming, diverging. And the skills that I bring are the organization piece. So at some stage, you've got all these ideas and you converge on the best one, hopefully. What I find with entrepreneurs and in particular solopreneurs is like they're often overwhelmed. They're heading for burnout. They're working on too many things or the wrong things. They find it difficult to decide on what the highest value is. And then they may have inefficiencies. So they may be building a team or they may have a new team, and inefficiencies will cost them time, energy, work. So, it's great the energy that these ideas bring, but there's a danger there that if you have lots of different things and lots of different options, you don't narrow your focus. And obviously, some of that chaos at the start of a startup or an entrepreneurial journey is very useful. But at some point when you've proven that things work, you need to be very clear on what your processes are, who's doing what. So that's where I come in. I'm a very organized, my background as a project manager. So, I've studied design thinking, agile, experimentation, all those innovation techniques, but also project management methodologies. And, I'm very organized. So I bring that organization, I bring that, well, let's look at your whole business. Let's look at the engine. How do you tune that engine? What are the pieces that are core to that? What are the processes? Who's needed for that? And we look at how to make that really fine-tuned and efficient and productive.
That's very good. It's very interesting. I mean, because I was going to ask you what are some of the common mistakes that your clients make, but I think you covered quite a few of them, that they're spread too thin.
Yeah.
I'm just, could you give us another insight there onto how you apply? Because it sounds interesting. As I said, I haven't seen too many coaches who mention the agile approach. Could you just give us an
Yeah.
idea for those who maybe mightn't be first of all, hugely aware exactly what Agile is. They've heard about it, but maybe they're not sure exactly what it is. And just
Yeah.
even in the overview, how you work with clients in applying that Agile.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, like at its core, Agile is about adapting to change in a chaotic
Mm.
environment, right? So rather than trying to make a plan and predict a year out, which we're notoriously bad at,
Yeah, we're
like,
terrible. Yeah.
even if you try and predict the next 2 weeks on your own, as
Yeah.
you'll do a lot less than you think you were going to get done, right? That's a fact. But we don't like
Right.
to deal with that in project land, right? As humans, there's a dissonance there, right?
Right.
So one of the advantages of using Agile is that your predictions are time limited. So you will only say plan 2 weeks ahead. Now that doesn't mean you have a roadmap. You don't have a roadmap for the future, but you don't make crazy predictions. So you pick your planning cadence, and let's say it's 1 month or 2 weeks
Mm.
ahead. You pick what the top priority is for that time period, and then you focus on execution. And it makes it actually a lot simpler. But the other key element of Agile, which is really useful, is that you measure your velocity. Okay, so
Mm.
you estimate everything that you're going to do in the next 2 weeks, let's say, and you'll give it a number of points, not hours. So you'll give it a number of points. So you might say this is a big piece of work, so this is 100 points. This piece of work is half that, so it's 50 points. This is a small piece of work, so it's 10 points. And you
Okay.
fix a time period for 2 weeks,
Okay.
and you see at the end of the 2 weeks what have you got done. So you have a metric. So you now have a velocity, and so that can be on an individual level. I get 200 points of work done every 2 weeks, or a team gets 200
Okay.
points of work done. It doesn't really matter. And then that can be used to predict what you can get done in the future. And that the key difference there with traditional project planning is people trying to guess how long something is going to take with no empirical historical evidence.
Right.
So, you'll ask a team, how long do you think? They'll say 6 months. They'll be wrong. Okay.
And it's usually what, more
Whereas
than a.
it's usually 12 months, maybe. Who
Okay.
knows?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just spend 2 weeks measuring the velocity, you now know how much that team get done. So they might get, say, 200 points done every 2 weeks.
Okay.
You then look at your next piece of work, and you ask them to size that work relative to past work. So
Gotcha.
you might have, 1,000 points worth of work. That's going to take 10 weeks. Even though your team think it's going to take, it should take shorter, your empirical evidence, your current velocity tells you. And I do some part-time project management for teams, and this is really accurate, but nobody really likes what it tells them, right? Because
Right.
it's always longer than what
Than
people
the
want to hear.
ideal.
But
And
it's much,
is that even with in the case where people, in I have a very overview background in project management. I didn't really work in the field much, but is there not a ton of slack built into it to make it more realistic, for, as you say, because it involves humans, Is that even with slack built in 10, 20, 30%, this sort of stuff? What I love about your system there, James, is
yeah.
that you're applying a methodology on the one hand, but it's also touching into real human behavior and real human psychology in there to make it far more effective. What are some of the
Mm,
outcomes of that? I mean, other than being, okay, people are on that new schedule, or at least a leader can see that his team on a metric, his or her team are
mm,
working away
yeah.
on schedule. Is there less burnout? Or like, what are some of the benefits there? Is
Well,
there greater clarity?
one of the benefits is, let me simplify that concept of points,
Mm,
because to just you next week, right?
right,
So most people go into the week and they say, right, I got 40 hours, right? So that's my capacity or my velocity, right? Let's just work in hours, right? So you
right,
got 40 hours, so I'm going to do 40 hours of work, right? If you actually observe the number of hours of productive work you do, you'll find, so you take out your breaks, you take out, say, meetings and
right.
non-productive, right? You probably have about 10 hours. So your
Okay.
true capacity is probably 10 hours, right? And actually, that's very empowering because you will get hyper focused on what is the top three things that are going to move the needle for me personally in my life, right? So I use Agile, across my life, but you can obviously apply it to your business, right? So I know that I have about 12 hours a week to work on my business. So that really gets me focused because, it's not 40, it's not a long list. You've
Yeah.
got to really get good at prioritization. And so it solves one of those problems that we talked about, working on too many things. It's a
Yeah.
human condition. Where we find it very hard to say no to things.
Yeah.
And actually, prioritization is not just making a list and saying yes to things. The hard part of prioritization is saying no. And prioritization is an act of trading off all the things you could do and narrowing it in to, I got 10 hours. I got four things I can do, 2 hours on each. Which ones are going to move the needle?
And I love
And
that. I love that
you become
focus
very good at setting boundaries.
on
Yeah.
what will actually move the needle. Because as you said, when you focus down, it's the Parkinson's law thing. As in the Parkinson's law, they said a job expands to the time you give it, but the
Yeah.
inverse is true as well. If you constrict that time, suddenly you're able to focus down much
Yeah.
better. And that leads me into the next question. What's one valuable free action that the audience can implement that will help them along these
Well,
lines?
this is it's a nice segue into because it's a very it's connected to the point I just made, right? So
Yeah.
what I would say to people is next week, when you're planning next week, take Friday off, even if you're not going to take it off. Take it off, right? Just okay. Well, next week's probably a bad example, right? If we got Monday off anyway, but whatever week it is that you decide to do this, imagine you only have Monday to Thursday, and imagine you're going to have all your work done by then. Plan Monday to Thursday, take Friday off, right? And aim to get the key needle movers, as we say, done by then, and take the Friday off. Now, it might be that you've still got a few loose ends to do on Friday, but it's going to be a very relaxing day. And all these business concepts, to me, they're just a means to an end because, behind me here, I've got live simply and
Yeah.
I've got like camper van and I like to have a nice life, right? And I enjoy my work, but really I think about this holistically. My priorities would be my own well-being, my family, and adventure and that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
But the gift is just work Monday to Thursday. The free action right now. Obviously, if you email me or find me on LinkedIn, I'll give you a guide to how to plan your week, and it's capacity based planning, right? So most people start with the demand. They make a list of all the things they have to do and they put pressure on themselves.
Right.
If you start with your capacity and you just say 8 hours, I'm gonna spend 8 hours doing really meaningful work. You can actually plan your week in 10 minutes using that method, right? So you calculate your capacity, what real time you have, and start with that. So start with like 8 or 10 hours. I'll email people how to plan the week using that method, and I think it would really. I've been using this with a few clients recently, and the main impact, which is beautiful for me, is not so much about the work. They're getting better work done, but they're just less stressed. They're feeling
Yeah.
less overwhelmed. They're sleeping better. Their families notice it. That's really
I might
beautiful thing
I
for me,
might just to suggest an observation. I think there's something very important there in a different way as a tertiary benefit. When people keep writing things on their inverted commas to-do list for a week and they never get to complete it all,
Yeah,
you feel like even if you've got a ton of stuff done, even more than most reasonable human beings would expect, you
yeah,
still feel a bit let down. You still feel like, and in your head, there's also this message that I keep breaking a promise. I keep not doing
yeah,
this. So
absolutely.
what I love about your system is that you're actually reducing the promise still hugely, but it's much more realistic, it's more attainable, and that clarity can create that energy and drive to get the stuff done and be done with it.
Yes,
Like actually
exactly.
complete your objectives in a proper project management setting, as you say. So I love that.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no guilt. And this doesn't stop you from, I'll have the list of the top four and I'll have bonus tracks, at the bottom
Yeah.
if I get to them, that's fine. But it doesn't stop you bringing those in. if you have a great week, but
Yeah,
one of my saboteurs, is perfectionism, and I this is a mistake I make, is like I have a list, and something psychological in me needs to tick every single box. So I have to fight that saboteur. And this is sort of my answer to it. And I've really honed in on starting less, just, I even write down sometimes when I'm planning the week, do not start this until the other ones above are finished.
exactly,
I have to
exactly.
stop myself.
Because I love it
So it's
because
easier to make that decision at the start of the week when you're conscious than when you're in execution mode and you're running and you're reacting to your environment. It's not a great It's not a great mindset to be making the decisions. So you try and make those no decisions when it's nice and quiet before the week starts.
exactly, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
you reminded me of a few things here, not least the story of how Tim Ferriss wrote the infamous 4-hour work week, was
Yeah.
he got very ill and he couldn't work 80 hours a week. So it
Yeah.
started that the exact thinking process you're talking about, well, a parallel one. Like
Yeah.
if I only have a few hours in a week to
Yeah.
really move the needle, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Because an
Yeah.
awful, they say the average knowledge worker actually only works about 2.5 hours of valuable work per week
Yeah.
anyway.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
rest is
Yeah.
admin and all sorts of other finding information, all sorts of
Well,
schlock,
really observe yourself
time.
during the day. Like your
Yeah,
circadian rhythms are only, your mental focus is only 2 or 3 hours for most adults. 2 or 3 hours in the morning between 8 and 12, you do your best work. So if you're having meetings and stuff like that, it's not a good use of it. That's when you're really, and if you really look at it, that's when you do your best work. And as you said, in the afternoon, you are fading. You can still be productive. You can still do stuff around the house, or you can still do stand-up meetings, and you
yeah.
can do things like this because your energy raises when you're talking to people. There's lots of stuff you can do, but deep thinking work, you're limited to, I'd say, to about 8 or 10 hours.
In the week. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, a focus. And this is something when you were talking there, you reminded me of Warren Buffett, that famous story where Warren Buffett, formerly until Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, were the
Oh,
richest
yeah.
men in the world. And one time he was asking his pilot, there was a pilot private plane or something, and he
Mm,
said as well, oh, what are you, they were talking about various things, and he said, oh, what's your goal, what are your ambitions? And he took out a list of 10 or 15 things,
mhm.
and Warren Buffett said, that's very interesting, and they in order? And he said, yeah. He said, okay, I want you to tear off the half the page.
Yeah.
He says, because he says that will make it 10 times more likely you might actually hit those.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's this idea of focusing on less and you're more likely to actually get it done. And he swore that
Yeah.
that was actually a big part of his success was, as
Yeah.
you say, focusing on less, on
Yeah.
simplifying and hitting those markers, which is very
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
Yes,
So just
exactly.
on that resource, where can people email you to get that, James?
You can email me at, I'm going to keep it simple, jameseparnell@gmail.com.
Okay.
James E for egg, Parnell at gmail.com, or just on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, James Parnell.
Yeah, and of course we'll link
Yeah,
to
that's
that
probably the easiest.
in the show
Yeah.
notes
Yeah.
beneath the episode, of course. So that's excellent stuff. So, and thank you for that free resource. It actually sounds great. That sounds fun. I might reach out for that myself,
Yeah, of
actually.
course. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I'll send the link or whatever.
it's
Yeah.
something that, yeah, it's something that I've been looking at recently and getting a lot more done in less time. And a lot of it's due, as you said, to when you do it in the day. You were talking about getting, an awful lot of your deep thinking work done earlier.
Yes.
This is something, I work with clients a lot and I talk to them about that idea of maker time versus manager time, and
Yeah.
how, as a good manager, as a good leader for your team, is being careful when you schedule the meetings. Because if
Yeah.
you schedule in the middle of a maker block, if you're working with
Yeah.
programmers or whoever, you can completely ruin that whole maker cycle, which is usually in terms of 90 minutes, 2 hours, or even 3 hours, whereas manager time is usually in terms of 15-minute blocks, right?
Yeah. It's true.
So
Yeah.
very relevant stuff. You're also
Yeah. And
reminding me
it's,
there just on,
yeah.
on Daniel Pink's When, which was about that, about, early birds get the work in early. If you're a night owl, a lot of your rhythms actually flip. So, but
Yeah.
people will know that inherently themselves if you're better working on you know, some of the deep thinking on after lunch or whatever. Some people
Yeah.
that actually works are at 4 o'clock or something. Whereas
Yeah,
other people, as
absolutely.
you said, are winding down and wanting to do lighter, more admin type of stuff.
Exactly. And it is a challenge. Like the convention in corporates, is
Hmm.
probably to have the meetings first thing in the morning, but we have daily stand-ups with some of the teams I work
Hmm.
with, and we'll try and get it done 15 minutes because we know if they're software teams in particular, those developers, they have a window to produce their best stuff. We want to get them off into it. So yeah, there can be a lot of distractions, and it's good to be conscious of it. And as a team, talk about, best times for meetings and stuff, and not just schedule them whenever in default mode.
Absolutely. I mean, there can be nearly be a consensus if you're the leader of your team. It's going, well, this works well for me, but does it work well for them? And actually having
Mm,
those conversations, even just once or twice or once a quarter.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So, James, what was maybe the one question I should have asked you that I did not?
The good one. Okay, probably okay, maybe something for yourself, right? So,
Yeah.
do you ever get overwhelmed, or do you ever get to the point where you don't know what the next thing to do is, and what do you do at that point? Like, I think that's an interesting thing because in terms of people who are listening, I get to that point even though I'm pretty good at planning. I
Yeah.
often, will, there'll be 2 or 3 times during the week where you've been so doing many different things and you'll be so in execution mode. How do you decide the next thing? So
It's usually to do with urgency, unfortunately, which is terrible. And because
yeah,
clarify with my clients, like yourself, along the same lines that, it's a lot easier to do important, urgent work or work that
yeah,
pays, and, you have a certain deadline, and that clarifies the time allowance, allocation, and also, as I said, the order to a certain extent.
yeah,
Always the biggest problem is
yeah,
non-urgent but important work. It's the
yeah,
classic thing. And when you do it, and of those projects, which project to focus on first? As you said, can you do it in parallel? Does it have to be done in order? Those sort of questions. That's where I tend
yeah,
to trip
yeah.
myself up regularly.
Well, I want to give you a little. I love acronyms, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I have like tons of acronyms, right? But DNA is one that I like, and it's decide the next action. How do you decide the next action, right? And I don't know
Right.
whether you read. There's a book. There's lots of books on this. Essentialism by Greg McKeown is a good
Yeah.
one. Also the One Thing, which kind of bangs on about the same thing for the whole book, but it gets its message across, right?
Right.
But in terms of a question that you should ask yourself when you do feel overwhelmed, and I think a lot of us do this, but what is the most useful single thing that I could do now such that everything else would be easier? So I often view it
Mm,
as
I see.
what's gonna relieve the stress the most. Now, sometimes that can be an urgent thing, like, well, I've got to get ready for a podcast, or I've got to get ready for a client meeting. So that's obviously getting ready is going to de-stress.
Hmm.
But if you're not sure on how to get ready, then you need to go away from where you're working and you need to just ask that question. What's the single most useful thing? Okay, so MUST is another acronym, most useful single thing, such that if it were done, everything else would be easier. Sometimes that's going for a walk. It might
Mm,
feel like it's a waste of time, but it's actually taking 5 or 10 to go away and let your mind, like, look up to the sky for openness to ideas
hmm.
rather than down at your feet, which tends to increase worry. So you kind of, percolate on all the things, allow yourself some time. And by the time you come back to your workplace or your desk, you'll be pretty clear on what you need to do. And it might not be the most urgent thing. You might realize that actually you're okay, or you'd be better off doing that tomorrow morning, um, or whatever. But I think that's a good question to ask, is what's gonna, reduce the stress the most when we're at that
It's a
point of
great
overwhelm
question.
and we're caught in indecision.
Hmm.
What's going to make everything else easier? That's a great question to ask because it's often not what you think, and you'll then become more clear-headed for all the rest of it.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. Thank you for another great insight there. Very much
Cool.
appreciated.
All right.
So, MUST, most
Yeah. Most useful
most
single thing.
useful single thing, and
Yeah.
DNA. Brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Well, James, where can people reach you? You mentioned on LinkedIn. Just look up James Parnell.
Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn. I'm actually changing my website right now, so I'll just say LinkedIn for now. My website will be live at jameseparnell.com, but it's going to take a couple more days. So that's my priority. But yeah,
Excellent.
LinkedIn, James Parnell.
Excellent stuff. That's jameseparnell.com. By the time this is out, the website, I'm sure, will be.
Oh, well, I better practice what I preach now, right?
Exactly.
Should only take 2 hours. Yeah.
Fabulous stuff. Thanks a
Cool.
million, James. Great
No
to talk
worries,
to you.
no worries, Alistair. Thank you.